You are listening to Estate at the Union, estate planning made simple. Here's your host, Brad Wiewel, from Texas Trust Law in Austin, Texas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Welcome to Estate of the Union. I'm Zach Wiewel, an attorney and principal here at Texas Trust Law. I'm joined today by Mr. Robert Hugos. Rob,
hi, Zach.
A lot of y'all might have worked with Rob before. Rob's been with us for over 10 years. He's a very qualified guy to be talking about what we're talking about today. He got his JD, well, he went to UT for undergrad, got his JD from Baylor. Before he started really into the law, he was a CPA, but he also got a master's in tax law from the best tax school in the country, NYU.
Right.
And so I'm very excited to talk with you about these Dynasty Trusts
I
today,
am too.
Rob. So let's just start with some basics because Dynasty Trusts can get really into the weeds really quickly, but let's start with some basic understanding. So first off, just generally, what is a Dynasty Trust?
A Dynasty Trust is a trust set up for generations. It holds property, investments, real estate, maybe a family business, but the idea is to put it in a trust under rules, maybe get some tax benefits, some asset protection, but the legacy will continue on through the generations, and we'll kind of explore each of those topics through the podcast, the asset protection, the tax benefits, how the trust is established, how it operates over the generations.
So let's just start with some of the tax aspects of this because we don't want to focus too much on the tax aspects because they do get complicated, but it's good to have a working understanding as we go through this.
All right.
So what is the estate tax? What is the generation skipping tax?
Yeah, there's three main tax areas that a Dynasty Trust can help with, and the first is the estate tax.
Sure.
Usually when a family has wealth that's going to be estate taxed, when the senior generation dies, it gets hit with a 40% tax. It goes down to the kids. They take that, they build it up again, and it gets hit with another 40% tax. Even the property inherited from the parents, not just what was created by the children. And then it goes down to the grandchildren, and they build wealth, and the original amount from the grandparents at this point is taxed again at 40%. So that's estate tax, and Dynasty Trust can completely eliminate that tax on currently up to $30 million of inheritance.
For a married couple.
For a married couple, 15 million single, 30 million. So that's great to save that 40% estate tax cost at each generation.
Yeah, because that's kind of how the estate and generation skipping tax work is at each generation, the IRS wants to impose potentially a 40% tax. But if you do it in the right way with the Dynasty Trust, you can eliminate or at least reduce the worst consequences of that. So,
And it goes on forever and ever, and nobody pays. No, there is a limit.
Well, let's talk about forever and ever.
There is a limit on how long these trusts can go on, and Zach, it depends on state law, and the laws change.
Yeah.
And currently in Texas, we can have Dynasty Trust for 300 years. Some states, 1,000 years. And I think there's one or two states that have unlimited numbers of years. So this is becoming a very powerful planning tool for estate tax. There's two other taxes that Dynasty Trust can reduce, and that is something called the GST tax, the Generation Skipping Transfer Tax. A lot of people don't know what it is. Basically, it's just another 40% tax on the same money, on the same property, when grandkids get it.
Yeah, or when great-grandkids get it.
Or great-grandkids, or the next generation after that. So that's another 40% tax, but there is an exemption that everybody has. It happens to equal $15 million per person and $30 million per couple. So if you create a Dynasty Trust with $30 million, married couple, they can not only pay estate tax, but they can also make sure their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren will never pay this additional GST 40% tax at each generation. So that's a huge savings.
Yeah.
The third big tax savings of a Dynasty Trust is you can design it carefully, and this has to be integrated with state law and asset protection. You can design the trust to reestablish a step-up in basis at each generation. So what's a step-up in basis? That means when a person dies, the cost of the stock or the cost of the land, the basis of the land that was inherited by the senior generation, at death, it steps up to the current fair market value. And that means if the land is sold, the stock is sold
Capital
by the
gains.
kids, there's no capital gain because the IRS says you get to pretend the cost of all the assets step up to fair market value at death.
Let me just give an example of just kind of how this works,
Yeah.
then we'll keep talking about Dynasty Trust. So let's say I bought my house for $100,000, and when I die, it's worth $500,000. And again, we're not going to the exceptions, but basically when I die, if my heirs, my kids, sell it the day after I die, all that built-in $400,000 of gain goes away because of the stepped-up basis. Now, if I sell it before I die, I would pay capital gains on that $400,000. But because my kids sell it after I die, they eliminate or can eliminate capital gains. One of my tax professors told me the best tax planning you can do is to die. It's honestly kind of true.
Gain.
Yeah. So let's keep rolling with
All right.
this.
One last thing about the capital gain and the generational 40% tax transfer tax to grandkids and great grandkids. The way a dynasty trust is created will either be designed to save the 40% GST tax, or it will be designed to save the roughly 24% capital gain tax through step up.
Yeah.
But you can't get both in the same trust. So these trusts need to be very carefully designed. If you can get the 40% GST elimination, the trust does that. If you've got even more than 30 million, then you want to make sure you save the capital gain tax. And that would be in a different dynasty trust.
Let's go ahead and talk about some of the additional benefits of a dynasty trust, or things you can add in. The two that come to mind are creditor protection and divorce protection. Can you talk a little bit about that, Rob?
Sure. The trust is set up to benefit children, beneficiaries,
Loved ones.
And the best way, we think, to do that is for each child to have their own dynasty trust from the parent, which means that child's share of inherited wealth can be managed by that child. The control can be direct. Child could be trustee or a co-trustee with another trustee in charge. And the dynasty trust will benefit that child, can benefit that child's children also, and give the child control. Covers health, education, and maintenance. That's the two features that make that trust so protective is it's irrevocable, and it has the standard of being distributed for health, education, and maintenance.
Whose health, education, and maintenance?
The child that inherits or the child's children. Health is for any health care, education, any education. Maintenance is basically living expense, so it's almost everything's going to fit through there unless it's extravagant or it's a gambling or something like that.
Yeah.
But with those two things, the standard of health, education, maintenance, and the irrevocability of the trust, that makes it protected for the beneficiary. So beneficiary may have an accident, be sued, go through divorce, in-law issues, even bankruptcy, a failed business. None of those situations are going to invade the dynasty trust. I kind of think of it, Zach, like you got a rich uncle that's giving you a bunch of property. You can spend it almost any way you want. You can control it. But it can't be taken from you because it's not owned by you. It's owned by the rich uncle. You can't have what is not yours taken.
Yeah.
You can't have what is not yours estate taxed. So it's in the trust, it's irrevocable, it's a separate legal person from the beneficiary. And that's where the protection exists. But the child still has or can have as much control as the senior generation wants to allow.
Yeah, because that's the thing too, is the senior generation, the person actually giving the money, all these can be so highly customized for that person, and maybe you're leaving it to a child, a loved one, where you just maybe it's too much money and you don't want them to have control. Maybe they have issues. Maybe they have financial issues. Maybe they have marriage issues.
Special needs.
Special needs, yeah. Yeah, we just had a podcast about that.
And when you set up an irrevocable trust, that's great for the senior generation. They know their kids. Mm-hmm. What about the grandkids? When their child passes away and this irrevocable trust goes down to grandkids, well, we can build in flexibility to allow the child to kind of tweak the trust for their own children and maybe change some of the terms so that if there is a special needs grandchild or there is a grandchild that just can't handle money and needs more help, the trust can be tweaked a little bit when the child passes. In each generation, they can have a power within very narrowly defined limits. They can have power to modify it for the next generation.
So one thing for, at least for grandparents watching, there's this concept out there called the bubble. You're living in a bubble. And, you know, it makes sense when I explain it, but basically the parents don't necessarily tell the grandparents everything that the grandchild does. Why? Because it would upset them, or it's just not relevant, or they're going through their teenage years and you know what, they're young, they're going to figure it out. So they might not be telling the grandparents every single thing the grandchild does. And so the grandparents are living in that bubble, that protected bubble. And their experience is, you know, oh, don't tell grandma or grandpa about this because we don't want them to know. It'd be too upsetting. But what Rob is saying is that way, if a grandparent leaves it to the parents in a dynasty trust and that parent has powers to adjust it when it goes to the grandchild, the parent knows their child better than anyone else, and so they can tweak it based off of things the grandparent might not have been exactly aware of. And so it's a huge benefit. One last thing before we move on is dynasty trusts in terms of asset and divorce and bankruptcy protection. Think about that as Thomas J. Henry protection or personal injury attorney protection. Basically, if the child gets into a wreck, you want to, or you can make sure that no matter what happens, good or bad, no one can take the money from this beneficiary, from this child. They can spend it if they want to, but they can't be forced to give the money to a Thomas J. Henry, to an ex-spouse. It's protected down the generations.
Sounds kind of simple. And that's the concept.
It sounds simple,
but
yeah.
The protection, the access to creditors and lawsuits, the control that a child can have, the ability to tweak it at death, it's highly dependent on the state law of the trust. In Texas, fortunately, we've got great state laws that allow maximum flexibility. Unfortunately, in some states, for a child to have this protection, the child has to have a co-trustee with an independent co-trustee with them, increasing costs and a little loss of control, but not in Texas. So we're very fortunate in Texas to have rules that allow us to have the most flexible dynasty trusts up to 300 years. But
300. Well, what was happening 300 years ago?
Gosh, 17,
Rob, you didn't pay attention in your history class?
17, I don't even...
1725, that's a math question, Rob.
17, wow, that's, I think we would have to go to Indian law and tribal law back that far.
So these could last for a long time, though.
They can,
so
that's right.
Let's hone down a little bit more on trustees. I guess, could you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of having a child, a beneficiary, a human serving as trustee versus a trust company serving as trustee?
Well, one is the state law and coordinated with that creditor protection law, bankruptcy law, and so that's one big decision. Will the child be able to be their own trustee or not?
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, sometimes some children, their aptitude is not accounting or math or money or investing, or even knowing good advisors to choose. And, each trust can be tailored so the child maybe could be a co-trustee. The trust is designed to provide for a minimum age before a child can have control of their trust. That might be 30.
Might be 40.
Might be 40.
Might be never.
There's an urban legend that men's brains don't fully develop till 30.
Rob,
but,
I'm 30. Does that mean I'm...
Welcome, finally, fully developed brain. I mean, you don't want somebody that's 18 years old to get in, have control of a trust. So, legally 18 is when property is going to come out, right?
Yeah.
You're fully in control at 18. So in the 20s, we worry a lot about There's a lot of mental illness that arises in the 20s, some in the early 20s, some in the later 20s towards 30, and that's a big unexpected thing. Fortunately, I mentioned earlier, we've got these powers where a parent down the generational line can adjust the trust for their kids if something like that happens. So the child could be a trustee. They can hire advisors. They can really take as much control as they want if they're given that flexibility. And they can hire a CPA, a financial advisor, but they're in charge of their distributions if their parents haven't restricted their power.
So let's talk about how that might come into play with the trust company. If the child or grandchild or loved one just isn't in a position where the grandparents or whoever is giving the money wants them to manage it.
Right.
What does that look like?
So a trust company is going to be in charge. Basically, the most basic thing they do is decide distributions from the trust. Distributions for the beneficiary's health, maintenance, living expense, educational expense. That's the primary thing. The second thing a trust company might do is also have a department that manages the financial investments. They, buy and sell stocks. They buy private equity. They buy land or real estate. That's another aspect of what a trust company can do.
Sure.
And they charge for each
role.
Of
course they charge for each
the role to take care of the beneficiary with distributions to make sure the distributions are appropriate, and the role to invest and manage. They're basically a financial advisor. Some trust companies only handle the distribution, which is great. If there is a long-term relationship with the financial advisor and the parents want that to go down to the kids and the grandkids, that legacy can be retained, and the same family financial advisor, wealth management advisor, can continue to manage the wealth for the kids and the grandkids. And then the trustee will only be in the role of distribution. But there is a fee. The fee's plus or minus 1%, plus or minus special needs, more, 2% maybe, but it shaves off.
It does, and it's an annual fee they typically charge.
But it's worth it when you're passing on this tremendous wealth down generationally. And if a child truly cannot manage funds for themselves, but they still have access to it if needed, 1% is not a huge cost.
Yeah, because they're investing it too, and hopefully it's growing in value.
Should be growing more than 1%. That's right. So that's a trust company, and of course they're going to be used if the beneficiary is too young.
Yeah.
A lot of our clients choose to let their kids manage their own trust, their own inheritance, anywhere from age 25, 30, 35, something like that is very common.
I have a couple other things I want to talk about, but one, just briefly, a power of appointments. And we've kind of alluded to that, but it can be very powerful.
Yeah.
And it's a word that most of y'all probably aren't as familiar with because it's a legal word or a legal phrase.
And it's archaic.
Yeah. Basically what it is when, let's say parent dies, leaves it to me, and they give me a power of appointments. Basically, whatever's left over from this, when I die, I have power over it. I can appoint the money in a certain way to certain people. And there's a lot of flexibility you can add in. You don't have to add it in a lot of situations, but you can. So would you mind explaining some of those powers?
So when we earlier mentioned that the children can tweak the trust for their next generation, for the grandchildren, this tweaking is done through power of appointment, and it's an Old English term that means power to give. It's, I appoint this account to you. It means I give the account to you. So it's a power to give, and it has to be carefully drafted into the trust agreement. It has to also carefully coordinate with state law because in some states, too much power to appoint makes the trust accessible to creditors in lawsuits and divorce. In states like Texas, we can give a lot of flexibility, and it's not invaded by creditors.
Yeah.
So we're fortunate. The power to appoint could, in later generations, you think of an irrevocable trust. That's kind of scary to think. It's unchangeable for 300 years or however long over all the generations. But the power to appoint allows a parent or a later generation to change the trust into something different as the law develops. And so creditor protection laws or rules change, or more flexibility is allowed, or the trust was established where any beneficiary that turns 30 can be their own trustee.
Sure.
Well, when a child or a generational beneficiary receives the property, they can change it for the next generation. They can redefine the scope of the trust. We want to make sure that there's no adverse tax consequence.
Sure.
That generational GST tax might be triggered. If this power is too broad, capital gains elimination that we talked about with step up may be lost if this is not drafted carefully. So it has to be coordinated with tax law, with state law, with creditor protection. But we can give, in Texas, fortunately, very, very vast powers to the generation before they pass to change the rules for the next generation with power of appointment.
Yeah, one thing just to keep in mind is Texas, we're, in a sense, we're a debtor state. There's stories from the 1800s, people would write on their door when they're leaving Tennessee or Georgia or wherever, GTT, gone to Texas, because their debts were so large they just could not make it work where they were, and so they come to Texas, and Texas just has such great asset protection laws for folks. Another, just briefly, a reason a person might want to consider giving a relatively flexible power of appointment is because, again, a grandparent leaves it to a child, and then that child has grandkids. Sometimes that child might not have the best relationship with one of their children, one of the grandkids. And a power of appointment could allow, if you want them to, the power to pick and choose who they leave this money to. This child, they've had issues with, they have a substance abuse issue, they don't like who they marry, you can give them the power to pick and choose among their own kids, their own loved ones, who to give it to. It can be very powerful. Let's talk about what types of families benefit most from Dynasty Trusts.
The families that find Dynasty Trusts kind of essential in their planning, their legal and tax planning, are those married couples that have over $30 million, because that's going to eliminate the estate tax when our client dies, when their child dies, when their grandchild dies. It eliminates that 40% estate tax on down the line. And for up to $30 million, it will eliminate that GST 40% additional tax at each generational level, from grandchild, great-grand, all the grandkids down the line. So it's essential that this type of Dynasty Trust be established. Otherwise, each generation is going to be exposed to estate tax and GST tax to the grandkids. So that's families with $30 million or more in a married couple.
Does it have to be? Do you have to have $30 million to do one of these?
There's most of our clients that create Dynasty Trusts that they're passing as their legacy. They do it because they have a family business that they want to keep going for generations. They have real estate portfolios or investments that are growing, and they want to preserve and protect that wealth down the generational line. And the only way to do it is in an irrevocable trust that can go on down the line. And again, it's irrevocable, but it can be changed at each generation. So that makes it so flexible. There's a lot of clients that don't have the $30 million, which is most of our clients. They're worried about their kids and their grandkids, their great-grandkids' education. They want to make sure those investments are there to be used for the family, that they're not going to be taken by an in-law, by divorces. The most responsible child or grandchild can have a car accident, can have a business failure and become bankrupt. And these are millions of dollars of costs. They cannot get into that legacy that was transferred down to them from the previous generation. So it's not just the estate tax, it's not just the $30 million and above. It's leaving a legacy to protect wealth, to a legacy of values through the generations, and a legacy of making sure that when a beneficiary inherits, that property is going to be there. Because statistics on inheritance outright, after 2 generations, it's gone. It's gone when we see it in our practice. So it's not just the super wealthy.
Well, as we kind of conclude, as we come to the end of this podcast, what are some of the downsides of Dynasty Trusts?
I've mentioned a few times that this has to be carefully crafted looking at specific state law, which is always changing. We have to make sure the trust has the flexibility to modify and be revised, especially at each generation, to account for these changes. The planner needs to have a in-depth knowledge of tax law, the tax code. And this is, Dynasty Trusts are not do-it-yourself. They are going to require very experienced professionals, not only the legal team, but CPAs, financial advisors. If there's any special needs, you might need special needs elder law attorneys. If there's a business involved, you might need business transactional attorneys to be involved in this planning also. So it's expensive. It's not doing a will. It's expensive planning. It has to be done by very skilled professionals all around. The whole team of professionals needs to be knowledgeable, skilled, and experienced. So it's cost. There's some complexity in setting it up to navigate through all these rules. It's probably not as complex for the child or the loved ones that benefit, but they need, even after a child benefits from a Dynasty Trust, they need to make sure, and the trustee needs to make sure that it's operated properly according to the documents, because if it's not operated correctly, it fails, and creditors, divorce, lawsuits will get into that trust. So there is some knowledge that needs to be maintained even after the beneficiary has received their property, to make sure that the trustee is following the rules, even if the beneficiary, the child, is their own trustee. So there's some complexity, the cost to set this up, and there's a little bit heightened awareness that the beneficiary needs to have to protect this legacy for the next generation.
Rob, just last question for you. Just parting words. What's other things you want to talk about, or just make sure people understand about Dynasty Trusts and why they're so beneficial, or can be?
I think other than what I just said about making sure it's operated properly, and I know that our firm, Texas Trust Law, values that tremendously, and we're developing a program to help beneficiaries that inherit wealth, to make sure their Dynasty Trusts are maintained properly, and that correct accounting and funding and rules are followed to make sure the in-laws, creditors, and bankruptcies can't get into the trust. So that's important to realize. And overall, it's one of the most powerful planning tools to transfer and carry on a legacy of values, of wealth, of protection for children and grandchildren, compared to just giving it to outright, not knowing what's going to happen to a child or grandchild during their life. Someone's going to get their inheritance when they're 18, and for any significant value. And I don't mean 30 million, but any significant wealth, meaningful wealth, it needs to be protected in some type of trust.
Well, thank you, Rob, so much for coming on the podcast today. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Again, this is a State of the Union with Texas Trust Law. Have a great day.